Emily sat by the window of her small suburban home in Portland, watching the autumn leaves drift down in slow spirals. The air outside was crisp, the kind that made the glass of tea in her hand feel warmer than usual. Life had felt heavy lately, her days quiet, her evenings long, and her heart carrying the kind of loneliness that comes when memories outweigh new beginnings. She had always been strong, always the one to keep moving forward. But there were days like this, when silence pressed too deeply on her chest. The clock ticked softly on the wall, and she thought about how still the house had become since her parents had passed and her closest friends had moved away. She had grown used to the emptiness, telling herself it was part of life. Yet, there were moments when she longed for a voice to break through. Just as her thoughts grew darker, the door creaked open, and footsteps echoed lightly against the wooden floor. She turned and saw Daniel, her nephew, standing at the doorway with a shy but gentle smile. He was in his early 20s, tall, his dark hair a little untidy, as if the wind had rushed through it on his way over. In his hand, he carried something long, wrapped loosely in an old cloth. Emily blinked in surprise. He usually called before visiting, but today he had simply walked in, and his sudden appearance brought a warmth she didn't expect. "Aunt Emily?" Daniel said softly, his voice filled with the kind of kindness that came naturally to him. "I wanted to show you something I made." He stepped forward and carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a stick, carved out of wood, smooth along the edges, polished just enough to catch the afternoon light. It wasn't perfect, but there was care in every line and curve. It's the kind of effort that only someone who worked with patience could bring out. Emily reached for it, her fingers brushing against the polished grain. "Daniel," she whispered, looking at him with wide eyes, "this is beautiful." His smile widened, a hint of pride in it. "I thought you might like it. I carved it last week. It reminded me of you somehow." Simple, but strong. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. It wasn't just a stick, it was a gesture, a thought made real. She could feel the time he had put into it, the long hours of shaping and sanding, and most of all, the intention behind bringing it to her. Her chest tightened with a strange mix of gratitude and something softer she couldn't quite name. She turned the stick over in her hands, noticing the delicate patterns he had etched along the side. They weren't elaborate, but they gave the wood a quiet charm. Emily found herself smiling, a smile she hadn't felt rise so naturally in weeks. Daniel sat down across from her, his eyes watching hers, as though he wanted to be sure she truly liked it. "You've always been the one who noticed the little things," he said gently. "I guess I wanted to give you something that wasn't just bought from a store. Something I made with my hands." The room grew warmer. Emily felt the firelight flicker in her chest, melting away the quiet loneliness that had weighed on her for so long. She had spent days surrounded by silence, yet now, with Daniel sitting there and offering her this simple gift, the house suddenly felt alive again. She placed the stick across her lap and looked at him carefully. "You didn't have to do this, Daniel," she said softly, her voice breaking just enough to reveal the emotion she usually kept hidden. "I wanted to," he replied, almost too quickly, as if the words had been waiting on his tongue. His eyes softened. "I wanted you to know you're not forgotten." Her breath caught at that. Not forgotten. It was such a small phrase, yet it carried the weight of everything she had been feeling. She had lived in the shadow of being overlooked, of being set aside, and here he was. A young man who had thought of her while shaping a piece of wood into something meaningful. Emily turned back to the window, the leaves outside still falling, golden and red against the pale sky. The world hadn't changed, yet in her hands was proof that care still existed, that someone had thought of her when she wasn't even expecting it. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore, it was full. Filled with the sound of presence, with the quiet rhythm of two hearts sharing the same room. She leaned back into her chair, still holding the stick. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Daniel didn't say much more. He didn't need to. The simple act of showing her what he had made was enough to create a bridge between them. One that felt sturdy, real, and unspoken. Emily knew, deep inside, that this wasn't just about the piece of wood. It was about the meaning carved into it, the thought of her, the effort. The quiet declaration that she mattered. That night, after Daniel had left, Emily placed the stick beside her bed. She stared at it for a long while before lying down. It stood against the wall like a small guardian of the moment she had just lived, reminding her of warmth in the middle of her loneliness. The house was still quiet, the kind of silence that usually weighed heavy, but tonight it felt different. Emily closed her eyes and held on to the thought of Daniel's smile, the way he had walked in unannounced, and the stick he had given her, a symbol of care, a reminder that even in her solitude, someone still thought of her. And as the wind rustled outside, carrying more leaves across the night, Emily felt a spark inside her heart that she hadn't felt in years. Something had shifted. Something had begun. Emily held the stick in her hands long after Daniel had gone home that evening. The wood felt alive, warm beneath her fingers, as though it carried a heartbeat of its own. She traced the carved patterns along its length and noticed the tiny marks, the places where his knife had slipped just slightly before being smoothed away. They were imperfections, but they gave the piece its soul. She whispered to herself, almost as if speaking to the stick. This came from his heart. The next morning, sunlight spilled across her bedroom, striking the stick where it rested against the nightstand. Emily reached for it before she even reached for her tea. She thought about Daniel's words from the day before. "I wanted you to know you're not forgotten." Those words echoed like a soft melody in her mind, stirring feelings she hadn't let herself feel for years. She had been living quietly, carrying unspoken regrets about a love that ended too soon, about choices that left her alone. Yet here was a gesture so small, yet so profound. Pulling her back into the world later that day, Emily heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Daniel again, his eyes bright, his smile easy. He stepped in without hesitation, glancing at the stick, now resting on the coffee table. "You kept it close," he said softly, as if relieved. "Of course," Emily replied, her voice lighter than she expected. "It's more than just wood, Daniel. It's a memory already." He tilted his head, curious. "A memory." She nodded, lowering her gaze to the patterns etched into the grain. "Yes, when I was your age, my father made me a swing in our backyard. Just a simple one from wood and rope. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like love, like proof that someone wanted me to fly, even if only a few feet off the ground. This stick. It reminds me of that, of being cared for." Daniel listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I'm glad," he said gently, "because you've always cared for everyone else. Someone should care for you too." Emily's breath caught, and she quickly looked away, afraid he would see too much in her expression. His words weren't dramatic, but they pierced deeper than anything she had heard in years. She ran her fingers along the smooth surface again, holding on to the comfort it carried. They sat together for a while, Daniel telling her about how he found the wood during one of his hikes. He had been walking alone in the forest, restless from the noise of city life, when he noticed a fallen branch. Something about its shape had drawn him in, as though it was waiting for him. He had carried it home and spent evenings slowly carving it, sanding it, shaping it into something worth keeping. When I finished, he admitted, "I didn't want to keep it for myself. I wanted it to be with you. It felt right." Emily listened quietly, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and confusion. She had spent years thinking that people rarely thought of her, that she was just a figure in the background of their busy lives. Yet here was Daniel, proving her wrong with a simple gift. It wasn't about the object, it was about the thought. That evening, after he left again, Emily placed the stick near the fireplace, where the flickering light made it glow like amber. She found herself staring at it while memories of her past surfaced. She thought of her first love, the letters she had written but never sent, the promises made under moonlight that faded before morning. She thought of her younger self, hopeful and alive, and wondered where that girl had gone. The stick reminded her she wasn't as invisible as she feared. Daniel's gesture whispered to her heart that she still mattered, that she was still someone worth remembering. And with that realization came a small but powerful shift inside her. The next morning, Emily decided to take the stick with her on a short walk through the garden. The roses were fading with the season, their petals dropping like tired tears onto the soil. She leaned on the stick lightly, testing its strength. It held her weight without breaking, steady and firm, just like the young man who had carved it. She smiled to herself, imagining his careful hand shaping every line. Later that day, Daniel returned once more. He noticed her carrying the stick and laughed softly. "You're already putting it to use." Emily smiled back, though her heart beat faster than it should. The morning air was sharp with the scent of fallen leaves, the kind of cold that nipped at the skin but carried a strange sweetness. Emily stood by the window, staring out at the river she had not visited in months. It used to be her favorite place, but life had slowed her steps, and loneliness had chained her heart to the walls of her home. She was lost in thought when Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Aunt Emily," he said, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, "let's go for a walk." By the riverside. "It's beautiful this time of year." Emily hesitated. Her days of long walks felt far behind her. But then her eyes fell on the wooden stick resting near the fireplace, the gift Daniel had made. Something inside her stirred. Maybe she needed this. Maybe she needed him to pull her out of her quiet corner. She picked up the stick, feeling its weight, and nodded. The two of them stepped outside, the crisp wind brushing against their faces. The path to the river was lined with golden and red leaves, crunching softly beneath their shoes. The trees stretched tall and bare, their branches swaying like dancers, bidding farewell to autumn. Daniel walked beside her, slowing his pace so she wouldn't feel rushed. They didn't speak much at first. The silence between them filled with the music of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant sound of water, the caw of a crow overhead. Emily felt her lungs fill with fresh air, something she hadn't noticed she had missed so badly. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You used to bring me here when I was little," he said, kicking at a stray stone on the path. "I remember you showed me how to skip rocks on the water. I never got it right." Emily laughed, the sound surprising her. "You always threw them too hard. The trick is in the wrist, not the arm." Daniel grinned, his eyes sparkling with memory. "Maybe you can show me again today." They reached the riverbank, where the water shimmered in silver ripples beneath the pale sun. Emily leaned on the stick as she lowered herself to sit on a large, flat stone. Daniel picked up a pebble and tossed it into the water. It sank with a dull plop. He laughed at himself. Still terrible. Emily bent down, choosing a smoother stone. She flicked it with her wrist, and it skipped 3 times before sinking. Daniel clapped lightly, a boyish smile spreading across his face. "You still have it." She shook her head, amused, but inside, she felt her heart warm. This simple moment, so ordinary, carried a weight she hadn't realized she needed. Being with him, sharing laughter, made her feel younger, alive as they sat by the river. Their words began to flow as naturally as the water beside them. Daniel spoke about his life, his dreams of traveling, the jobs he had tried and given up on, the way he felt both excited and lost about the future. Emily listened with patience, her eyes fixed on the horizon. When he paused, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Life never turns out the way we planned," she said. "But that doesn't mean it isn't worth living. Sometimes the detours bring us where we were meant to be." Daniel looked at her carefully. "Is that how you feel about your life? That you're where you're meant to be?" Her throat tightened. She thought of the love she had lost, the years she had spent alone, the nights when she wished someone would hold her hand. She forced a small smile. "I don't know, but I know I survived, and maybe that's enough." Daniel's expression softened, as though her honesty touched something inside him. He reached out, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. The simple gesture sent a shiver down her spine. "You've done more than survive," he said. "You've given me a place to come back to. You've been my safe place since I was a kid. That matters more than you think." Emily turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. She hadn't thought of herself that way, as someone's anchor. To hear it from him was both comforting and dangerous, stirring feelings she didn't want to name. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the water. Emily gripped the stick tighter, grounding herself. She leaned on it as she stood, Daniel quickly offering his hand to steady her. Their eyes met for a moment, and the world seemed to pause. There was nothing inappropriate in his gaze. But there was depth and unspoken understanding, a bond neither of them could deny. They began walking again, following the curve of the river. Emily felt lighter, as though every step shook off a piece of the loneliness she had been carrying for years. Daniel spoke again, his tone softer now. You know, when I carved that stick, I thought about how strong you've always been. I wanted to give you something that could hold you the way you've always held everyone else. Her heart tightened. She wanted to tell him how much that meant, how much his presence had filled the silence of her days, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply smiled. Her eyes glistening, the path narrowed as they approached the old wooden bridge that crossed the river. Emily remembered walking across it with Daniel when he was a boy, his tiny hand gripping hers tightly. Now he walked beside her, taller, stronger, his hand hovering near hers as if ready to catch her if she stumbled. When they reached the middle of the bridge, they stopped. The water rushed below, carrying fallen leaves downstream. Daniel leaned against the railing, looking out over the river. It's strange, he said. Every time I come here, it feels like time slows down, like the world outside doesn't matter. Emily nodded, her voice soft. That's why I used to bring you here. I wanted you to know there's always a place where you can just breathe. He turned toward her, his expression serious now. You're that place for me too, Aunt Emily. Not just this river, you. Her heart stumbled at his words. She opened her mouth, but no reply came. The air between them grew heavy, filled with all the things neither dared to say. She tightened her grip on the stick, her lifeline, and looked away toward the horizon, afraid her face might reveal too much. The walk back was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts. Emily's mind raced with emotions she couldn't control, gratitude, fear, longing, confusion. She told herself to be careful, to remember the lines that life had drawn. But her heart whispered something else. When they reached the house, Daniel lingered at the door. Thank you for coming with me, he said softly. I don't think I've ever felt closer to you than I do now. Emily's chest tightened. She managed a small nod, her voice caught in her throat. Good night, Daniel. As he walked away, she leaned against the doorframe, holding the stick close. She knew something had changed on that walk by the river. Something quiet but undeniable. And though she tried to push it away, her heart whispered the truth. She was no longer just his aunt. She was a woman who had begun to feel again. The fire crackled softly in the living room, sending waves of warmth across the quiet house. Emily sat near the hearth, the carved stick resting across her lap. She ran her fingers along its smooth surface, the way someone might touch a keepsake, too precious to set aside. The flames danced in her eyes, but her mind was elsewhere, on the walk she had taken with Daniel, on the words he had spoken by the river. On the way, silence between them had begun to feel full instead of empty. She heard the door open behind her, and when she turned, Daniel was there. His hair was still damp from the evening rain, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He carried no bundle, no gift this time, just himself. He slipped inside quietly, closing the door as though he didn't want to disturb the peace she had wrapped herself in. Still awake? He asked gently, moving closer. Emily nodded, shifting the stick to the side. Couldn't sleep. The fire helps me think. Daniel lowered himself onto the armchair across from her. The glow of the flames lit his face, sharpening the lines of his jaw, softening his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was expectant, like the pause before a question that could change everything. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Can I tell you something I've never said before? Emily's chest tightened. She nodded, bracing herself. He took a deep breath. I've always felt close to you. Not just because you're family, but because you've always understood me. Even when I was younger, I could tell you things I couldn't say to anyone else. You never judged me. You just listened. Emily lowered her gaze to the fire, her heart racing. His voice carried a weight that made her uneasy, not because it was wrong, but because it touched too deeply. Daniel continued, his words soft but steady. Sometimes I feel like you're the only person who truly sees me. Like you look past everything I pretend to be and you just know who I am. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Emily clasped her hands together, unsure of what to say. His words were gentle, but they stirred something in her, something she had buried beneath years of silence. She wanted to dismiss it lightly, to laugh it off, but the sincerity in his voice made that impossible. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "you don't realize what you're saying." But he shook his head. "I do. I'm not trying to confuse things. I just wanted you to know. You matter to me more than anyone else does. And I don't mean that lightly." Her eyes stung with tears she hadn't expected. For years she had longed to hear words like these from anyone. To be told she mattered, that she wasn't invisible, that her presence made a difference. And here was Daniel, offering her the very thing she had craved, without hesitation, without fear. She pressed a hand against her chest, steadying her breathing. "You shouldn't say